curing diseases, stopping seizures, fueling the whole pizza industry. And the secret to success in bodybuilding? Is there anything that cannabis cannot do? For decades, we've been aware of the benefits of cannabis. We've all known about the side effects, and some of which positive, some of which, of course, potentially negative. In the past few years, with legalization fully on the horizon globally and actually taking place in some countries, of course, these issues have come back to light, and people are focusing in on the potential ways that they can harness cannabis for the better. And ifbb pros seem to be absolutely no different. Is this the secret sauce to the perfect bodybuilding stack? Let's find out. James Hollingshead, Luke Sando, Arnold Schwarzenegger and Josh Bridgman, the list of industry names who claim to or have used cannabis in the past during their bodybuilding careers is potentially endless. So what benefits are these people crediting to cannabis? Benefit number one is sleep. We all know that sleep is majorly affected by cannabis. It is a great sleep aid. You can spark up a joint, out next minute. Sleep and recovery are vital for bodybuilding. The link is obvious. We're not going to dwell on this one too much. It's something that can be used as pretty much a natural sleeping medication. Is going to absolutely be an asset for any bodybuilder. Benefit number two that a lot of people are reporting is anti-inflammatory and pain relief effects. Many people report like less pains and aches. People use it as a painkiller after the gym, for their recovery, to rest. Lots of people use it as a tool, and people who use it recreationally tend to get these effects also. It's well documented that cannabis is an anti-inflammatory. It works really well. There are many mechanisms in which it does this, and it seems to not just tackle the inflammation itself, but also tackle some of the surrounding issues that can be caused. Number three, and one of the other side effects, is appetite. The most famous side effect possible from cannabis is the munchies. I'm missatisfying those munchies. This could be incredibly effective in off season, right? And I can vouch for the fact that it is. If you are force feeding calories, if you're trying to get as much food in as possible, obviously something which majorly spikes your appetite and potentially lead to binge eating. Although not ideal if you're trying to stay fairly strict in the off season, it can be a vital tool when you hit a wall. Obviously in a prep, this is going to be debatable. We'll get into a little bit how that affects people during a prep or during a diet, or people who aren't looking to gain weight at all. But generally speaking, if we're sticking strictly to the off season, or somebody who's not too controlled in terms of their diet, this could be definitely something that's worth exploring. Purported benefit number four would be stress relief. This is all tying into recovery again, isn't it? Look, like stress is a really important factor for how well you recover, obviously day to day, your mental and physical health. All of these things are really tied in and are essential parts of bodybuilding. A lot of us don't rest enough as it is. But without the stress, if you can introduce something which took that off your plate for a little while, obviously gave you some mental clarity and relaxation time, that would enable your body to have a period of time where it can just focus on resting, recovering. And believe me, if there's one thing that those ads from the 80s and the war on drugs actually got right, it's probably that person melting into a sofa.
Did weed do this? Is that from that weed there? I don't feel anything at all.
Depending on the strain and how you react, obviously it can make you more lethargic. Some people it makes them more energetic. This is a very individual thing. We won't go into it too much, but generally speaking, it has a mind-altering effect, right? And it's not something like a hallucinant where it's really extreme, or a tren where it's really extreme. This is something which simply helps you shut off stress, shut off the world. The last thing you want to be doing when you're smoking cannabis or taking cannabis is to actually care about issues in the world. You're doing this to sort of separate yourself, and mentally it does help you to block out a lot of the noise. It would also be great for obviously separating your evenings out. So a lot of us non-stop, like I'm getting up at the minute at 6 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, depending on the day it is. Being able to separate that evening and going, right, this is my cutoff. This is the time where, it's all about chilling. That could definitely be beneficial too. So what does the science say? Well, obviously, as expected, with most of society knowing about all of those things and fully accepting they are side effects and things that cannabis can help with, these are statistically and scientifically backed up. But what other properties could cannabis provide which could be useful to us degenerates? Well, the information is pretty limited. Legality, of course, for a long period of time has restricted the amount of research that can be done around cannabis, much like hallucinants and anabolics. Unfortunately, due to the fact that it's been branded as an illegal substance, that heavily restricts the amount of experimentation and studies that can actually use these drugs. They have to be very carefully controlled. This isn't necessarily proportional, especially with cannabis, And this is one of the big issues of legalization, is that the potential benefits way outweigh any potential negatives. We all know the arguments, no one's ever overdosed, it's much safer than the alternatives out there. But with those limitations have come decades of a lack of research and a lack of understanding about the full nature of this plant. We all know the natural world has many surprises, and cannabis is definitely one of them. There's 113 different cannabinoids that can all interact with your body and attach to receptors within your body which are designed to receive those. We only really know about 2 of them, and even those are under research. That's THC and CBD. It may be decades before we know the full possibilities. There's so much there to look into, and obviously studies and stuff like that take time, and especially to get studies which actually could potentially benefit the bodybuilding community. We all know it's once in a blue moon that something could be transferred and used in the full process of bodybuilding. But every single one of those cannabinoids presents new opportunities. Now here is one thing though that I found particularly interesting and that rang true for me, and might be the most exciting or interesting possible application of cannabis for the bodybuilding world. Is cannabis the antidote to calories? Research conducted in 2011, further research around that in young people and obesity, and metadata, a metadata report, which is basically the highest tier of scientific literature. So it's a view of all scientific literature out there in the market. You know, people come together and they sort of co-author a paper to basically summarize and look at the issue as a whole and try and come to a high level conclusion about a topic. They all found a correlation between cannabis use, and I mean frequent cannabis use, so more than 3 times a week, so probably daily we're talking at that point, and lower obesity or BMIs. This is all with a higher caloric intake. Correlation does not equal causation. This is a really important thing to bear in mind with science, something that people don't understand about it. Just because there's a correlating effect, it does not mean that it's that directly influencing that. There could be many mechanisms of actions or variables in between which are causing that effect to ring true. However, the frequent testing and positive results of this suggests that this is an exciting area which needs to be researched further. As expected, currently the cause is unknown. The current suggestion is that interaction with the cannabinoid receptor 1 actually causes this effect to happen, and it causes basically a metabolism boost, also a lowering of the likelihood of energy actually being retained or stored. You're eating calories, and that's less likely to store as body fat. The long and short of it anyway. Now, of course, this energy could also be turned into muscle. This is a complex issue. I'm not deep into science on these kind of topics, so I won't dive into that. But it's an interesting thought that potentially this could be the reason why people eat more, because they've got 1, a boosted metabolism, and second of all, the food they are eating, only a certain amount of it is being stored or retained by the body. The other side effects we listed, recovery, sleep, could all be factors, absolutely, and all of these things could absolutely positively affect body composition. The results are inconclusive, but as somebody who's eaten a whole pizza, a tray of cupcakes, ice cream, I've got to say, the evidence is quite compelling. And the fact that we know that muscle and fat tissues do have a relationship with those receptors in the body, it does suggest there's something there. But let's talk about the cons of cannabis, because this is important to provide the other angle, okay? And there are cons to cannabis, do not get me wrong, although of course they're nowhere near what political bodies and the war on drugs dialogue would have persuaded you. Still, they do exist. Con number 1, now let's talk about this. This is actually a bit of a misconception. Testosterone levels. Although there has been shown to have a slight dip in testosterone levels of people who are newly introduced to cannabis, people who are chronic users, what an ironic term, people who are daily users, this effect is completely negated. So basically, exactly the same as anyone else. Let's talk appetite next. Now, that appetite could be really useful in the off season, but it could be detrimental in a prep or a diet. Unless you have really strong self-control, this might be one to avoid if you're trying to lose weight. If you could use it without binging, the metabolism effects could actually prove to be a net positive of using cannabis for dieting. However, you have to be strong-willed. Personally, my usage has not been affected by the fact that I'm on prep, but I also have been sticking to my plan to pretty much the dot. My higher goal plays into this, and nothing's going to get in the way, especially not a joint in the evening. Another con, that there's no more
coming in the gym, coming at home, and coming backstage when I pump up.
Unfortunately, Arnold, think you might have missed the mark on this one. Cannabis does affect sperm count and volume and fertility levels by proxy. So you do have to bear this in mind if you're a chronic user. Now, it's suggested it does bounce back, so that's absolutely fine. However, you do need to bear in mind that anything that suppresses your system is going to have a long-term effect if you never stop. Anyone who's blasting grams of tren might want to think twice in that case. Although somebody who's blasting grams of tren probably didn't think once. Let's talk muscle growth. This is something that nobody wants to affect no matter what they're taking. Some inflammation is needed for muscle growth. This is something that we know, and obviously the anti-inflammatory effects of cannabis could potentially be beneficial for performance, or they could be detrimental. If they affect your ability for muscle growth, muscle tissue growth, then obviously any effect on recovery is going to be pretty well negated. We don't know how far that anti-inflammatory effect goes, so to be honest, I wouldn't really count this one as a dead certain positive that it has a major effect. I would say my results are pretty in line with anyone else who's entered the enhanced world or anyone else in the natural world also. We do know, however, that use pre-workout can affect performance, which obviously would affect muscle growth. It's suggested that focus and concentration and stuff like that are affected, and energy levels. Personally, I found pretty much the opposite. I might have been too stoned to notice. So let's talk the big con, the massive one, the one that is staring us right in the face, the elephant in the room. Smoking. In the UK, joints are preferred. They are the preferred method of consumption of cannabis. That's mixing cannabis and tobacco within an unfiltered king-size cigarette. Basically, you're rolling a blunt but with some tobacco, right? Although nicotine has some potential benefits, the cons definitely outweigh the pros. First of all, it's hella addictive. I know this from experience. It's something that you don't really want to mess with. Also, the damaging effects, of course, of smoking, something containing nicotine, especially tobacco, which has multiple other carcinogens, chemicals, and all that kind of stuff in it, are going to negate any possible mental positive effects. Blunts, vapes, edibles, there are many ways that you can take cannabis without having to smoke. However, the problem with cannabis is that it interacts with your body in a different way in pretty much all of those methodologies. In smoking normally, it'll be different to smoking a blunt, which will be different to vaping, which will definitely be different to edibles. Edibles actually change the whole structure of cannabis when it enters your body as a drug. So it interacts with your body on a whole nother level. It increases the hallucinogenic possibilities. It really does change the experience that you're going to have using this.
Everything is going flat, and I think I might be dead.
So that's not something that I'd recommend generally for bodybuilding unless you're just after a good time. Vapes also isolate THC, so you're potentially missing out on all the other benefits of the cannabinoids from the complete plant. So you might want to think twice about using alternatives, and this might just have to be a conversation about smoking a blunt or not. Cancer, lung capacity, circulation, the potential cons and drawbacks of smoking anything though are major, and this isn't something I'm recommending to anyone. This isn't a recommendation video. I always want to make this clear. This is me just looking at the anecdotal and the scientific research around the issue and then applying that with my experience and just giving my meta-analysis on here for you. So this is for educational purposes only, guys. So let's talk my experience. I've used cannabis consistently for a long period of time. I'm not going to lie to you. It's something which I started young, it's part of the culture. We all know, the things you do when you're kids, stupid. In my experience, all the above, all the stuff that we discussed pretty much rings true. When used as a tool and used very specifically, it can be amazing. And the positive effects, even if you are a daily constant user, still shine through, however they are lessened. And then that's when the negative effects start to show through, all the other stuff that we've mentioned, stuff such as, first of all, your body does tend to downregulate the receptors. So there is suggestion there that your body can get used to it, and we all know that tolerance can go up. So tolerance breaks are absolutely something that I'd recommend, and they're really not that difficult, guys. Seriously, just take a week, come back, and you'll also preserve your stash. That can be difficult, of course, not everyone can, but then equally, then you're talking about having cannabis as a problem in your life, not using it as a potential solution for issues. So that's a very different conversation. We're not here to talk about addiction. This isn't AA. Now, it's worth mentioning, cannabis doesn't suit everyone. This is also in my experience, right? Lots of people have different reactions. People just generally cannot use it at all, and that's fine. You know, you should never try and use something, especially something that's illegal or something that has drawbacks such as cannabis does. If your body reacts really violently back to something, this video isn't for you. This is for people who have no problem with it but just want to know relatively whether it could be a pro or a con in their life. Cannabis can be incredibly useful as somebody who doesn't really drink as well for social situations and separate out those evenings, as I mentioned. It's something which gives me a sense of relaxation after, you know, being non-stop. So how would you theoretically use cannabis if you're trying to do it really safely? You do something like get an at-home vaporizer, a proper setup, not something that's just a little pen vape. They cause a lot of issues within the US. I wouldn't recommend them. But an at-home vaporizer, which is a bit costly, but is generally the healthiest way to approach it, would probably be the best point of call. I'm not telling you to go out and start smoking weed, because that's bad.
Smoking's bad, alcohol is bad, and as for drugs, well, drugs are bad.
And you might turn into melted ice cream. This is something where the scientific research really needs to come on further, but generally speaking, the positive attributes of cannabis seem to show some really, really promising results. It seems like this could be really utilised in the future, and the more that we can research those cannabinoids, their individual effects, how we isolate that, how we draw it out so that not everyone has to smoke up a blunt when they want to just feel a bit more relaxed or get less inflammation. You know, that's going to be when we really hit the sweet spot. As with any drug, the more research, the more that we can negate the side effects, the better humanity will be. People are going to use these things no matter what. We may as well help them do it safely. Probably 420 somewhere. I'll see you next time.